evening, everyone, and welcome back to Mark Anthony's Music Picks. Today is episode 141, and for today's episode, I'm going to be reviewing a rather eccentric pair of artists that I've been following for, I guess, almost the last 2 decades. So today, we're going to talk about Quiet Village. Quiet Village is a duo of Matt Edwards, who is also more famously known as Radio Slave, and he is paired up with another artist that I'll admit I'm not as familiar with, Joel Martin. Matt is part of many different groups and has many aliases, and so does Joel. But for the Quiet Village alias, in my experience with them, they've focused their production career on what I would consider to be rather esoteric, eccentric, slow motion disco re-edits. It was really hard for me when I was thinking about how I was going to talk about their sound to describe it, because it's really one of a kind. Most of the tracks that I review on this channel, I would say, are in the 120 to maybe 135 BPM range. And for fans of Quiet Village, or for people that don't know a lot about them, like I said, it's slow motion. So you're dealing more with BPMs ranging anywhere from 99, I found, on the low end, up to about 122 on the high end on one of their fastest tracks that I've found. So they're generally not in the club space, although you could use a lot of these tracks to open a set and maybe play a little bit softer of an intro or lower BPM. I think this is more like chilling out, listening at home, and just kind of vibing either by yourself or with friends. The other thing that I noticed about Quiet Village tracks is that they tend to have a psychedelic type edge to them. It seems like it's music that would lend itself well to different altered states. They'll use sounds that are like almost like intentionally provocative to the ears. They'll play with stereo effects, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. It's just it's the type of music that an avid home listener would find interesting. So, although I know Quiet Village is not probably going to be my most popular episode ever, I would challenge you to just stay here with me, hang out, and you might find some nice chill out records that you'll really enjoy. I think Quiet Village first came on the map in 2008 with their album, but before that they had, I think 2 or 3 kind of like disco re-edits that had been put out and were rather on the sneak. I think the label that they were on, I might not get this exactly right, but it was something called like Whatever We Want or something along those lines, where they were taking old tracks that they were fans of and making disco re-edits of them. And in the early 2000s, that was like kind of ahead of its time, because if you think about it, the new disco craze didn't really kick into high gear until about 2009 to 2012. So these guys were kind of at the cutting edge of that. Not to say that disco edits haven't been around forever, but it was like they really tapped into the slow motion vibe and created something that ended up really blowing up a few years later. In 2008, they came, I think, really into full bloom with this album here. And this is the Silent Movie album. It has this kind of nice wooden cover. And if you look at the back, you get a pretty eclectic track list. Obviously, I mean, if you listen through this, you'll hear what I mean as far as it being eclectic. This is the type of thing that would be great to put on when you had company over, or if you were listening in the afternoon. Now, when I was making this episode, I went back and I actually looked at the review that I wrote for this initially, and I actually decided to make edits to it, because you could tell, I made edits to my review because I could tell looking back at my words that I was like somewhat disillusioned and jaded by this album, and I'll tell you why here in a second. So this is fundamentally nothing but disco re-edits. And when I first heard it, I first sampled Victoria's Secret, and I fell in love with it. Victoria's Secret is a remake of the Chi Lights record that is called The Coldest Days of My Life, which released in, I think, either 1971 or 1972. And that track has a very, very somber tone to it, and it has a really nice ambience in the beginning of it. And that's what ended up, that intro ambience, the first minute of The Coldest Days of My Life, ended up being the primary foundation for what Quiet Village ended up calling Victoria's Secret. Now, I didn't know that it was based on anything else. I thought Victoria's Secret was a Quiet Village original, and therefore I put it way up on this pedestal as if it was this entirely original creation, and it wasn't. So when I discovered that not only was Victoria's Secret a re-edit, but everything else on here is a re-edit that Quiet Village pulled from, probably from their record archives, I I think disillusionment would be the best word for it. I was just shocked and stunned, and I was like, oh, I was hyping this to people that I knew, and I wrote a good review about it, and I felt a little bit naive not knowing that. And I don't think it was my fault because there's no credits on here. But now the older version of me comes back and looks at it and says, well, if they probably couldn't license it, I mean, how many copies do you think this sold? I mean, maybe 500 or 1,000 tops. So to try to come back and get licensing for all these, it would be just nothing but a big loss for them, and it never would have been released. So now, looking more at this from the adult perspective, I think of it just as a way to get their re-edits out, and they had to change the name. So I don't fault them for that. But Victoria's Secret is the intro, like I said, to Coldest Days of Our Life. It's really, really soft and magical. The waves crashing, the birds chirping, the guy humming. It is just pure, pure magic. So that was 2008. And let me take you back to 2007 because I want to kind of just paint the picture here. In 2007, Francois, who is known for being a very eccentric DJ, known for playing many different styles and genres in a set. I mean, he's a journeyman. He is not a flatliner by any means. He released on his label Deep Space Media, which is the sub-label of Wave Music, which is Francois's primary outlet for his releases. He released this Road of Life, and this, if you can just put the low BPM on this aside and just let yourself get a little bit weird, this is such a cool track. And when it's categorized on Discogs as dub, and I forget what the other genre is. It might be like techno or something like that, like dub and then techno, techno. I think it's actually like a reggaeton beat. When I hear that, I actually hear that sort of Latin influence in the rhythm. That's what it sounds like to me. The BPM on the original is, I think, 106 when I clocked it. So it's a really weird record, but it is extremely good. It's like a fusion of the, like I said, that reggaeton beat with some of the weird styled minimal melodies that you were hearing in that era. 2007 was like peak weird minimal. And a track that comes to mind is that would be comparative to this is Stefan Goldman's Sleepy Hollow, which was released on Intervision around the same time. Not that they only sound similar in their vibe. I mean, if you listen to Road of Life, it's actually quite spooky and dark, like a nightmare, soundtrack. I mean, it's really eerie, and I really adore it for that. On the B side, Quiet Village did their Sound Factory dub, which is, I think, the fastest Quiet Village track that I've ever been able to personally locate myself, coming in at around 122 beats per minute. In the Quiet Village Sound Factory dub, Quiet Village introduces like a very strange melody that is not in the original. And when I was talking about Quiet Village adding almost like psychedelic elements to their tracks, that's a good example of that. If you listen to the lead in this, especially with headphones on, it has this kind of like vibration effect on your ear, and there's just something strange about it, and I think that's exactly what they were going for. It's a very odd sound. I don't know what combination of gear was used to make it, but it almost has like a slight distortion on it that makes you feel uneasy. Now, that's not the record that I'm featuring. Even though I love this, very much, you can get it for $6. This is totally worth it for $6. It's underappreciated, and they made a lot of them, so you can get it easy. Here's where it comes into full bloom. In 2012, there was, I think, like a series of remixes that were released called Too High to Move, right? Which tells you like the vibe that they were going for. I mean, these guys are definitely stoners. I'm 100% certain of it. Probably some acid or something else mixed in there too. But here, Quiet Village did two remixes of the Too High to Move series, and you'll see featured here is Francois K's Road of Life. Now it's the Quiet Village unreleased dub, and this thing is a monster. The original Road of Life, like I said, was, what did I say? It was 106. This one's 99 beats per minute, and it is so fun to jam out to this. It's like really serious head nodding gear, and if you want to dance to it, if you're brave enough to sit and listen to it and dance to it by itself, it's just a monster. It's got almost like a tribally drum pattern, but slowed down to 99 beats per minute, which is really enticing for me. It's got kind of dub influences, and the way the percussion sits, it's just a really, really tight record. The arrangement's enough to keep you interested for the entire track, and I believe the duration is 9 or 10 minutes. For me, it could have been 15, 18 minutes. I would have been fine. Now, moving up to 2012, many of you know the famous label that Matt Edwards is known for as Radio Slave. He he would very often release remixes and originals on his Rekids label. Well, Rekids in 2012 spawned off this super eccentric label that is called Pyramids of Mars. And I just want to take an aside there and just say, as somebody that's a fan of outer space and the pyramids and human history, it would be absolutely fascinating, and I would love it if there were pyramids that were ever found on Mars. I mean, can you imagine the mind f that would be to try to explain how they got there, especially if they were built in a similar style or pattern or arrangement to what was found on Earth? I mean, that would just be like game over. Nobody would be able to ever compute that. So just the name of the label, Pyramids of Mars, I absolutely love it. Now that label is definitely some eccentric music. I'm going to show you this here. I just picked this up actually about a week ago, and this was sort of the catalyst for me to make this episode. This is Pyramids of Mars 001, and it has a track called Bahadir on the A side, which is like a really minimal dub track. This is a 10-inch, and it's clear, but despite those two potential limitations, it's actually not a limitation at all. I actually think this vinyl sounds great. The levels are good, and it's a really, really clean sounding dub record. The track that I wanted to present to you here is just mysteriously called Untitled, and you can see it's QV, Quiet Village, Untitled. It's about an 8 or 9 minute track, and it features an element that really got me hooked. It has a girl's almost opera voice as the main lead. And when I talked to her, or when I mentioned earlier about Quiet Village being perfectly content to mess with your head, I mean, this is like serious headphone stuff if you want to listen to this, or make sure that you have left and right delineated on your setup if you want to get the full effect. They really just sit there and chop the stereo on that female opera voice back and forth, and to me, it's just a home run. So the underlying beat, nothing incredibly original about it. It's solid, it's minimal, maybe tinges of old Basic Channel or Maurizio in there for dub techno fans, but that opera voice is really what sets that off. Now, to be honest with you, I completely forgot about Quiet Village from about 2012 until recently. I know they've still been releasing, but I think my taste just kind of wandered away from that. And I stumbled, I don't even know how I found this, but I found it on Juno. I think I was just sifting through the new releases, and I found this here. Now, the artist here is Panoram. The label is Running Back, but this is not the typical Running Back, which is kind of like, I would say like almost a commercial leaning dance label. Maybe not commercial, but it's just I don't know, maybe a little bit of a safe label. I would say that maybe a little bit safe, but they spawned a sub label called Running Back Incantations, which has according to the Discogs page, non-dance floor related music on it. And the source material for this release here is Panoram's Acrobatic Thoughts album, which was released on digital and vinyl on the Incantations label in 2022. And in kind of classic fashion, you release an album and maybe you have a couple of your friends do a remix pack for it, and that's what this is. So on the A side, you get Quiet Village's remix of Panoram's track called Sea Brain. And on the B side, there's a guy named Lozano that did a really cool, funky remix on the B side. For this episode, I'm going to concentrate on the A side because obviously that's where the Quiet Village lives. And this is, to me, really one of the best tracks that Quiet Village has ever released. I went back and listened to the original version of Seabrain just to see what the inspiration was for the remix, and it wasn't really obvious to me. The thing that I absolutely love about the Seabrain remix, and that I think anybody would love, is the melody in there. The melody in the Seabrain remix is very, it's very addictive. It has almost not sonically, but it has the vibe or the feeling of a really cheesy 80s song. There's just something bright and cheery about it that you really can't deny, and it kind of takes me back to that 1984 to 1987 era. I don't know if it's the nature of the synth that's used, or the structure of the melody is reminding me of something else, but Quiet Village really knocked one out of the park, and no slight to Panoram, because, you know, I honestly, I didn't spend that much time listening to the original album, but they really did that remix a good service. And to close out the episode, I'm going to go a little bit away from Quiet Village, but I wanted to sneak this record in because I can't really picture dropping it into another episode, at least not in the near future, and I want to give it a shout out. So this is on Mule Music, and it's a 2007 release. And if you look at this, I mean, it's kind of, this is the kind of record that you would kind of maybe pass by on your shelf, dull gray, dull, you know, kind of off yellow label. It doesn't really stand out. This is Force of Nature's EP called, what's it called? Sequencer, right? Now on the A side, it has two tracks that basically refer back to older, I think Italo house or Italo disco tracks. I didn't really dig into the history of that because I'm not reviewing the A side on this. I wanted to give the Rekid remix, which is not Quiet Village, it's just that's Matt Edwards by himself. I really wanted to give this a shout out and sneak it in here because, number one, it has that really slow, weird down tempo that fits perfectly with the other Quiet Village that's in here. And number two, this track is super creepy. There's something weird going on in the time signatures in this Rekid remix of Sequencer that's a little bit hard to pin down, and that's what makes it nasty. If you listen to the kicks and the percussion, everything's 4/4 and it's on time, but that lead bass synth, if you want to call it that, I think you would say it's a bass synth. If you listen to it, it's like it's constantly shifting and passing the other 4/4 time beat. So I don't know if it's like a 3/4 or a 5/4, but it's off by one, so you just kind of get this slow drift. And at some point it drifts so far that it's like it drifts far enough that it actually starts getting closer on the other side, right? So it actually starts to like re-emerge and refocus for a little bit. So you get this feeling of the tension being increased and then decreased and increased and decreased as the track moves through. This also has ties in, because it came out in 2007, to the overall dark minimal scene that was really popular back then. This is like crazy, mind-blowing opening set material, in my opinion. Probably underrated, understated. If you played this out at a venue to kick off your set and managed to get out of the low BPM that this is into the rest of your set, I think people would remember you forever. All right, that's all from my Quiet Village episode. I hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to comment down below if you have any Quiet Village recommendations for me. And if you have any Matt Edwards or Joel Martin recommendations too, I would love to learn more about Joel. Feel free to add them to the comments section. I really appreciate hearing from you. That's all for today, and take care.